All right, welcome to the show. This is James Morris. And one of the things we talked about yesterday, I just touched on, was whether you want to buy aftermarket parts or original equipment parts from the manufacturer, like from the dealership. I'm going to give you the pros, I'm going to give you the cons of both. The pros of buying aftermarket is they're normally about 20 to 40% cheaper. That's the pros. They're usually available at your local store. If not, they can get them overnight. If the car is more than 10 years old, there doesn't seem to be as much problem with a part as aftermarket for a car that's more than 10 years old, because in a lot of cases, that part the aftermarket selling originally now comes from the manufacturer who made it, because now they're not required to support that vehicle. They're only required to support a car for 10 years. I know you say, what? Well, that's the way the laws are written out there. 10 years is all the manufacturers require to support. And I've had cars that come in, that are 15 years old, and I have a hard time getting parts for it. I've had cars come in that are 12 years old and had hard times getting parts for it. Normally, if they're 10 years or less, there's no problem whatsoever. But once a car gets more than 10 years old, and that's where you may have to go to aftermarket. And aftermarket, like at Napa or CarQuest, not CarQuest, they call it Discount. These different places, a lot of times when the car is more than 10 years old, they will buy their stock from General Motors or Ford or Chrysler of oxygen sensors and PCV valves and relays and on and on and on. And normally you'll find out that that part you're buying is exactly the same price as what you're paying for if you went to the dealership to get it, but they don't stock it anymore. And that's because the dealerships have discontinued carrying it. Now they sold it to the aftermarket. The aftermarket's reboxed it, put their name brand on it, even though it's the same part made by General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, Honda, Toyota, whatever it is. That's on cars 10 years old, that are 10 years old or older. Now, I should say older than 10 years old, not up to 10 years old or older. Now, when you get a car that's, say, 5 years old, 6 years old, I have a lot of people out there, the car's out of warranty, say an oxygen sensor goes bad. First thing they want to do, well, I'll put an oxygen sensor from XYZ parts store. Well, they put it in there, and then they wonder 6 months later, or even not even that long, why they're still getting a check engine light. Well, sometimes they just don't work the way they're supposed to work. I know that sounds hard to believe, but they just don't, because a lot of times the aftermarket parts that are being made for cars less than 10 years old are reverse engineered. Yes, we all know how a PCV valve works. We all know how an oxygen sensor works. But sometimes the little differences between manufacturers make that big a difference. If you've got a car that doesn't have give an example. I had a customer that spent a year and over $2,000 trying to fix a Jeep that kept setting codes for oxygen sensors. He changed all of his oxygen sensors. Now this car, this car is only a 4-year-old car, 4 years old, out of warranty. It went out of warranty, I want to say it had like 60,000 miles on it. I can't remember exactly, but the point was he changed all the oxygen sensors. He's taken it to, to several shops trying to fix it. And now I'm going back from memory. This was like last year. And then he brings it to me and he says, I hear you have the factory equipment. Yes, I have the factory scanners, and I know how to reprogram, and I know how to do all that. I'd like for you to figure out what's wrong with my car. And I said, I'll be more than happy to, but I'm going to charge you a couple hours to diagnose it, because first off, you've been to a dozen different shops. They've done a dozen different things, and I have to figure out what they've all done and make sure they're all right. And he says, okay, that's no problem whatsoever. And I said, and you're going to have to give me permission to fix this. Because I'm not about to spend 2-3 hours telling you what's wrong with it for you to go home and buy you a part to stick in there and then come back and tell me that's not going to fix it. So I want to take this car in, I want to diagnose it, I want to fix it, and I'm going to give you a warranty. Do you agree to that? Okay, I agree to that. Don't go over this amount of money. No problem whatsoever. Without talking to you first, we're going to talk. Anyway, I look at it, put it on my machine, and within an hour, I've come to the conclusion that the oxygen sensors he's got in there do not have enough resistance for the heater circuit. And I'm sitting here going, I can't believe this. Look at this. And what was happening is they wouldn't get hot enough. That's what was going on. They would get only to about 800 degrees Fahrenheit. And by having the factory scanner, I could see it. I saw the actual temperature. I'm sitting there going, I know for a fact that's supposed to be 13 to 1400 degrees temperature. I know that's what that's supposed to be. I think it doesn't get over 800 degrees. I said, there's something wrong here. There's a heater in the oxygen sensor to get it hot, to make it go into what we call closed loop, to allow the computer to control the amount of fuel the engine's getting and using. If it doesn't get that hot and go into closed loop, it stays into open loop. And open loop just means it just drops a certain amount of fuel in there to get the car where it's going, where it won't misfire or stumble. But it uses a lot more fuel that way. And its job is to use more fuel to get it hot enough for the oxygen sensor to do its job to make the car go into closed loop. But that's what we were seeing happening. We were seeing this happening, and the car was 4 to 5 years old. It was a Jeep, and he kept buying his parts from the aftermarket places. And I told him when the car came in, I said, sir, you got codes for your oxygen sensor. Where'd you buy the oxygen sensors at? I bought them from XYZ parts store. I said, more than likely, that's what your problem is. I can't believe that I bought 4 oxygen sensors and they've returned them and they're exactly, whoa, calm down. I'm just telling you, it's very unusual for the same thing to happen that you're seeing here. 4 oxygen sensors in a row that you've already changed, not once but twice, and you're still getting problems with it. I said, either there's something wrong with the oxygen sensors, because you're setting codes for oxygen sensors. I said, there's either something wrong with the oxygen sensors or there's something wrong with the programming inside the vehicle. I can check the programming and I can see if it's right and see if it needs to be updated, and I can go from there. And I can look for technical service bulletins and I can see what's going on there. And I can actually go into the oxygen sensors and check the temperatures and the graphing of how they're working. Now, these are air-fuel ratio sensors and oxygen sensors. I have to, let me change that. Air-fuel ratio sensors look like oxygen sensors, but they don't bounce from 0.2 to 0.9 volt. They stay around 1 volt steady. You know, if it goes any higher than 1 volt, it's running leaner. If it goes any lower than 1 volt, it's running richer. It's a little different than an oxygen sensor. Its goal is to flatline, to stay around 0.7, 0.9 to 1 volt, right there. And that's where it's supposed to be. Where the rear oxygen sensor, it comes up, and as you give it gas, it goes rich, and then as it let off, it goes down. And it does that for about 2 minutes. Then all of a sudden, this oxygen sensor in the front gets hot enough that it says, okay, I'm at 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm in closed loop. I'm maintaining 1 volt. I'm going to make sure this is what, it's got a real fine line there. Instead of it bouncing 0.9 to 0.2, it's just barely bouncing. And you can't even see it on the graph, but that barely bouncing contributes to a precise amount of fuel going into the engine to give you the best fuel mileage, and get this, saves the catalytic converter. Because what's the number 1 job of a car's computer out there, everybody? I know y'all listened to the show long enough. It's to save the catalytic catalytic converter. That's the job of the car's computer. And before I forget, a car's computer and a catalytic converter are the 2 things on a vehicle that are covered for 8 years or 80,000 miles. You may have a 3-year, 36,000 mile warranty on your car. It's not going, you know, and you've got 40,000 miles in your car, and you take it to a shop. Mister, you need to replace your computer. It's bad. It's burn up. Oh, well, great. Just pick that thing up if it can't be driven and drive it right over to, or tow it over to the dealership and say, I have a problem here. They say my computer's bad. Now, you may have to pay for the diagnostics to make sure the computer is bad, but that's a hell of a lot cheaper. We should have said that. It's a lot cheaper than having to pay, you know, $1,000, $2,000 to have a computer installed and programmed and put up. Now, not all computers cost that. Some cost a lot more. Most cost, I would say, on today's cars, anywhere between $500 and $1,500. Yeah, somewhere in that general area, depending on the make, model, and year of an American car. If it's a Chrysler, I ain't gonna tell you. I've seen some of them $400, and I've seen some of them $1,500, $1,600. And they won't even get a warranty because they have so many problems with them. They can sell you the old style, but they got new styles that are being developed, and they're not for sale right now because they haven't been developed. But that's another show altogether about Chrysler computer systems out there. But these are just some of the things I have found out about OE parts, original equipment parts made from the manufacturer, designed specifically for a vehicle. And they have to, and I mean, this is, when you go to the dealership, they're used to working on cars under warranty. What's the purpose of a dealership? Two reasons. 1, to sell you a car, and 2, to maintain that car while it's under warranty. Now, the service department is, you know, that's what keeps it alive. Now, if you didn't have the service department, they couldn't keep the cars under warranty. They couldn't have a dealership. They go hand in hand. There's a strong possibility in the next 10, 15, well, I said this 10 years ago, they were talking about getting rid of dealerships and making them regional repair facilities, or dealerships that, you know, are super dealers. And we're seeing that all around the country, where you'll have, well, like one time we had 1, 2, 3 general, we had Lloyd Pontiac, we had Nelson Buick, and Tommy Thomas. We had 3 General Motors dealerships in here. And then when the Great Recession came by a few years ago, we're down to 1. And we have 1 big one. And that's, you know, and that's what they're talking about happening in throughout the United States. We've gone from 3-4 dealerships of one type of General Motors cars, or Fords, or Chryslers, or Hondas, or Toyotas, whatever. Now where we only have one, and they're doing that to downsize, and that's just business, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with it, and to make sure they can stay profitable. But things are changing. Things are changing rapidly. They're talking about in the next few years getting rid of cars that have steering wheels and brake pedals. We're talking about cars that are autonomous, that you don't even own, that you share and ride sharing program where you will pay X amount of dollars like a water bill every month. And that's one of the ideas they're talking about. It's all fluid right now. There's no set rules how they're going to do it. But you'd have on your, you have to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, depending on the weather and the traffic and where you live or whatever, a car will pull up, a driverless car, autonomous car will pull up to your driveway, I guess hit the horn or notify you on your cell phone that your ride is here. You go out, get in the car, and it drives you where you're supposed to go. Now, you may have 2 or 3 other people in the car, like a taxi service. That's what they're talking about. That's the ride share program. But they're also talking about if that gets to the point where all cars are like that on the road, there wouldn't be any reason for as many police officers, because the cars will be controlled by computers. And so people will say, what would happen? Well, they won't be speeding. There won't be running traffic lines, stop signs, because it's a computer. It's not going to, who's going to write a ticket to, we're going to write you a ticket, Mr. Chevrolet. It doesn't know. So that's what I'm saying. They're talking about how things are going to be changing in the next few years by 2030. Now, that's 12 years away from now. Not very long. I said 2030. 2030 is they're talking about that only about 78 million cars will be on the road by the year 2030, privately owned and on the highway. Right now, there's 322 or something, over 300 million, I can safely say over 300 million registered cars in the United States riding on the roads. But they're saying by the year 2030. Now, Business Insider, there's been a few articles. Just go check out Business Insider. This is something they wrote a couple years ago. And a few other people have jumped on this and said, you know what, the way things are trending, there's a strong possibility that parking lots may become a thing of the past. The idea of a parking lot not needed? I know that's one of the biggest problems we have in Panama City is there's no place to park if you go downtown. So things are changing. Things are changing every day in the automotive repair industry. We're seeing things, but like I talked about earlier, on cars that are less than 10 years old, when it comes to parts on emissions, such as oxygen sensors, PCV valves, even fuel pumps, things like that depend on the powertrain management, computers, things like that. I recommend original equipment parts. Once a car gets over 10 years old, you can buy those same original equipment parts, but you're buying it from Napa, CarQuest, AutoZone, whatever, because the manufacturer has now sold those parts and the proprietary information about that oxygen sensor and about that PCV valve. So they're not reverse engineered. So when you buy a new part, that doesn't necessarily mean never ever worked. Sometimes I put new parts in that never ever worked. That's what NEW stands for. But what ends up happening is once the car gets 10 years old, you can, in confidence, buy an oxygen sensor or a PCV valve or a fuel pump, and it's going to be the right one for the car, and it's going to work. Hey, this is James Morris. You got a car question, give us a call, 850-763-0555. I got Karen Schoen calling, and we'll be right back.
If you want the best deal in town for tires, you need to call Baytown Tires at 873-8900.
Hanson and the guys at Baytown Tires take pride in serving Panama City for over 20 years. Baytown Tires on Highway 98 in St. Andrews. All service work backed by a nationwide warranty.
Water is too powerful to fight alone. Mr. Router Plumbing. Sink, shower, and toilet emergency drain services.
All right, welcome back. That was a quick break. About a second or two, it seemed like. But anyway, I got Karen Schoen. She's calling all the way from Greenwood, Florida. Now, Karen, I was coming back from South Florida, and there's a Greensboro before you get towards you. There's a Greenwood, and there's up there in Chipley, you've got another green. I can't even remember what Greenhead. There's a lot of greens up there. I guess because it's so far in the woods, there's a lot of green stuff up there. But the point is, those are some old communities that have been around for over 100 years, including where you live up there, and they were the original settlements of Florida because, well, back 100 years ago, there was no air conditioning, and there was hardly any transportation to the coast other than maybe by train or wagon. We're talking 100 years ago, before cars were prevalent.
Well, the settlers settled around rivers and other waterways, and that made it easier for them to be able to ship goods and services, and that's why Port St. Joe was such a prominent port at that time. And up here, I discovered that this was one of the largest logging communities.
Right.
We used to see a tremendous forestry area with logging, and Florida, I think, at that time was number 2 to Oregon in logging.
I knew by the turn of the century we were doing a lot of logging in the South, Louisiana.
I was talking to a farmer whose family was a logging family, and he said that they used to cut down the trees on their property, and then they would go down the river. They went down the Holmes River, and he said it took them 3 days to walk back.
Yeah, it took them 3 days to walk back.
They go down the river on the logs, and then what happened? Because there was no, as you said, there was no highway. There was nobody sitting there in the taxi and the Uber to bring them home. You had the 2 feet, and that's how you got home.
Well,
some of the richest history that our children are never going to know.
Well, I know that up in that area, you're near Highway 90 in that area up there. That was one of the main east-west routes in Florida, Highway 90 before Interstate 10. Matter of fact, Interstate 10 parallels Highway 90 pretty much the whole way from Jacksonville all the way to Pensacola. But the thing is, that was a farming area, and that's how most people were able to travel by car, was Highway 90 before we had Interstate 10. But
and when my family used to come down, we used to go down from New York once a year down to South Florida. We used to go down on Highway 1. So you can imagine how long that trip took.
What did you go? Highway 1, then took Highway 90? No, you didn't go Highway 90. But
no, we just stayed on Highway 1 and went south.
I tell you what.
When we came from New York, there was no such thing as a turnpike. There was no such thing as 95. There was one, and that's how you came. That was how we traveled the country.
Well, I tell you what. I just was down visiting down in that area where Highway 1A is, and it's still crowded. I mean, it's crowded. If you want to travel down A1A, you better be prepared to take your time, because it takes a while to get from one point to another on the Front Beach Road there, so to speak. And that's the way it is here in Panama City. But having a car is so very, very important. Can you imagine living back? Well, you don't have to imagine, Karen. Remember when you were a child, did y'all have air conditioning in your vehicle when you came to Florida?
No. Air conditioning in the room, air conditioning in the house.
Y'all had 240 air conditioning. You had 2 windows down at 40 miles an hour. Maybe, no, y'all probably had 440. 4 windows down
440, right.
at 40 miles an hour. But you got to admit, even though you got the windows down, that is a hot air. If you go outside and drive down the road and without your air conditioning on, you will be. A lot of people don't know how hot it is out there in the middle of the day when you're trying to drive, even at 40, 50 miles an hour. That's hot, and that's what it is. It's terrible out there. But imagine how much Florida has changed. Well, you don't have to imagine. You can look in the last. Well, since air conditioning has been commonplace on cars and vehicles, when you and I were growing up, central air was not common in homes. It was in homes. They had window units. I'm not saying
we had 2 window units in our house.
And now,
and we had to share because the electricity. See, here was the other side. The electricity wasn't set up to be able to handle the unit.
True. Your houses weren't set up. You're absolutely right about that. Those are some of the things that have changed in our lifetime that we take for granted. We don't realize how convenient electricity is, and that's another thing that's happening in the next.
I was thinking the other day how many times I missed my mother. We missed communicated because when I learned to drive, I used to pick her up from work.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to go to the subway. And we didn't have cell phones, and we had no way to communicate with each other. And the closest would be, I'm leaving the office now, and then I would know in 45 minutes I would have to be there to pick her up unless there was a problem on the subway. But there was no way of communicating. And many times I sat there for hours waiting for her to come off the subway, not knowing what was going on. And we had no convenience of a cell phone. We didn't even have a pager.
Mm-hmm.
We had nothing. And we were shooting in the dark many times.
What you had was your mama gave you a dime, and that you were supposed to call on the payphone.
That's right.
Because we had
call on the payphone.
Because I was realizing it the other day. I was driving around, and a lot of the at one time, even in the project areas, where the projects are, that's what I call. I didn't a lot of people call it, there was at least one cell phone. Well, there's no cell phones anymore in the projects. They're all gone. There is no. I walked over there I was just driving through the other day. I said, "Do they have a cell phone?" They still had They still had a telephone emblem up there. There was a payphone, but I looked over there and there's no payphone there. And then
it was. When you go back to New York or when you go back to an area that you used to live in, and what's different here? There's no payphone booth on every corner.
Well, they've become
There's a phone booth.
Right. Well, they've become obsolete. Those are some of the things that have become obsolete in our lifetime. We expected to have payphones. Well, we don't have them anymore. Everybody has a cell phone or at least a flip phone, some sort of way of communicating. And when you and I were a child, we used to watch or read the comics, and Dick Tracy would talk into his wrist, and and they would tell him where he had to be and all that. And that seems so science fiction that Dick Tracy would talk to somebody on his wrist radio, and be able to get in his car and speed across town and be there and catch the bad guys before they left. And now, that is science fact and not fiction. That happens right now. Not that Dick Tracy talks on his phone, but we have instantaneous communication. And people like things quick. I mean, we've gotten used to it. I mean, just the idea, if you get in traffic and the light takes too long to change, you see the person behind you hitting the horn or whatever. I mean, road rage is something that we've developed. I do not remember road rage when I was a kid. I really don't. Did it happen, or maybe we just too young and know?
I don't think we paid attention as much, but I do remember one very, very snowy night when we were coming home, and that was the other thing. There was hardly any cars on the road.
That's true too.
So there wasn't anything like that. But as cars became more important and we saw more of them on the road, then road rage began to take over.
Because when we were growing up, we didn't have the completed the Eisenhower Interstate Highway system we have now. That wasn't put into place till 1958 or 59 when it got started. It wasn't completed. Well, it's still not completed.
No, it's not completed because every time I go any place, there's always the cones are up and they're always directing traffic to another area because they're fixing the road.
I tell you what,
when is it completed?
I don't know how I do it, but when I go down to visit my daughters, I can take the 295 loop and get down to 95 and go down. But when I come up north, somehow or another, I end up missing the 295 loop and end up going downtown Jacksonville every time. I don't know. I do not know what my problem is, but somehow or another, I missed the exit, and he who hesitates is lost, or 40 miles to the next exit. That's my case. I hesitated when I shouldn't. But things have changed so much, and it's due to cars. I mean,
it is absolutely due to cars, because when you look at a map demographically of America, all of the towns and cities grew up along rivers and along railroad routes.
Yes. Yeah,
and that's how the people got around.
Yeah, Greenwood, that had, if I'm not mistaken, railroad was near there. If I'm not mistaken, and like Chipley has a railroad that goes through.
They all had railroads, and that was the way people got around at that time.
Yeah,
it's fascinating. I love to go and go to the old train shows and see the old locomotives. and my grandfather was a trainman, so that was always a lot of fun. We used to ride the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad.
Well, and so your grandfather went back a long time. You know, if he used to ride, you called it the Lackawanna Railroad, or
Yeah, the Erie-Lackawanna was his. He was a trainman on the Erie-Lackawanna.
Well, that's up there, up north.
That was up north. Yeah, that was up north, right?
But I was one of the things I've noticed as I've gotten older. I started noticing when I travel about how far it is between towns. And when I go to visit my mother, you know, I drive on a lot of these 2-lane roads. But what I've noticed is about every 25 to 26 miles is a town. You know, it's about. And I started thinking, I said, maybe years ago it took them all day to travel that far. And and that's what it seems to be. If you could ride a horse or take a wagon, it would take all day, and we're talking 12 hours. You know, to go, and you could go about 25 miles, and that's where a town would be. And going
right, exactly. That's the way the towns and cities were set up. And the walls, they followed the railroad or they followed a river.
Well, just saying, go from Panama City up 77. You'll see that about every 25 miles. There's, and I kind of like. Did they plan it this way, or I just think it's just how it worked out, you know? But you got to admit, roads have really made a difference.
A lot of it, I guess, is necessity. You had to take a break, so there had to be a town nearby so you could take a break.
Well,
but there wasn't any McDonald's. Either you sat at Aunt Mary's stand and you had some of her real Southern fried chicken.
Well, they talk a lot about Panama City, about, you know, I got about a minute left here, but how where we used to have the airport. The airport used to be where Central Baptist Church, well, now it's called Palm Bay School. But anyway, it used to be at Balboa and 11th Street. And that was considered Balboa and 11th Street, which is west of me, used to be considered the country. And I am east of there, and the difference between Glenwood, where I'm at right now, and Panama City, those were two separate individual towns. You know, it's just, but they were separated only by the woods. But you know, and it's just amazing. Just in this part along the Gulf Coast, about every 25 miles, you'll see a town or a community or whatever.
And now what's happening, because the population in Florida is expanding so rapidly.
Yes.
What's happening to the towns is they're beginning to merge together. And you can't find a separation between one town and the next because they're building on every piece of postage stamp. And the sad part is, and I hope it doesn't happen up here, is that the traffic becomes like what it is down on the peninsula, and as you said, that is horror.
Yeah, you just never, only
the world's longest parking lot is I-95.
Only thing I know is the only constant in life is change.
Part of what I'd like to let you know is what we do and how we work our system. Basically, we've got about 700 stocking dealers scattered around the 15 counties here in the Big Bend area of the state. I run a fleet of trucks, vans, and what we call hotshot vehicles to deliver to our dealers quickly so they can help service you as fast and efficiently as they can. Provide timely and efficient service, and we're there to take care of our dealers, who in turn can take care of their customers.